So hi there guys, it's Smotown here. There are a number of pretty solid rumours about, and I thought I'd take this opportunity to not only discuss them, but give my final verdict on what I thought about Sekiro, and why a lack of DLC for this title, that I love, is actually an okay thing, and not needed, if a little disappointing. At E3, following the announcement of the new Elden Ring project, people began to speculate about the absence of any mention of Sekiro. Then articles began to pick up a rumour that was sparked on the Reset Era forums by a user called Tapo, who said, "As far as I know, there is no one working on Sekiro DLC." This was later quote-unquote verified by a admin of the site who claims that the OP does have a good source at From Software. This of course has now been picked up by the mainstream media. At the time of this video, there is not, as far as I can see, any official confirmation from Software about this state of play. But I do think there is good reason to believe this may be true. Given the announcement of Elden Ring, this might not come as much of a shock to a lot of people. We had already heard rumours a number of months ago about a project between J.R.R. Martin and From Software. And my friend The Embrace One, whose stuff you should check out in the links below, suggested that a secondary team might have been responsible for Sekiro, and another team had been working on this Great Rune project, as it was known at the time of the discussion. And this turns out to be true, since we know that the two games were developed in tandem. As per the Xbox interview at E3 with Miyazaki, he said this: "Development for Elden Ring started just after the development for Dark Souls 3 DLC had ended. So this confirms that From Software will have been working on these two titles simultaneously, one team on the linear adventure game Sekiro and another on this new open world fantasy title. With the completion of Sekiro, we can choose to see the Reset Era rumours as validated, as it does tie in with the final year of development for Elden Ring, an all hands on deck kind of situation. Elden Ring promises to be From Software's most ambitious project yet in a lot of ways, in that it's changing their proven recipe for action-adventure RPGs with a linear kind of world to a more expansive open world. That will require a lot of design work, art assets, game design, and people to make sure that these things all become a reality." This sentiment of lots of work is echoed by Miyazaki in this interview with Xbox at E3, who again says this about the work needed for the game. "Due to this, the scale of the world and its narrative, as well as the depth and freedom of exploration, have increased dramatically. It is without a doubt our biggest title yet in terms of sheer volume. So therefore, from the lips of the man himself, this project will be a massive undertaking for From Software, especially since it's nothing they've really kind of done before. And therefore it would make prudent sense to move assets and resource away from a linear adventure game that has no online aspects that will need constant maintenance. In my mind, Sekiro is already a game that stands alone without needing anything else. A game that was met with praise for its new combat systems. A refreshing change from the usual From Software title. It achieved that it was meant to. An experiment for new combat systems and other features that they'd wanted to try for a long time. And essentially, it is a stopgap between DS3 and Elden Ring. From Software ultimately needs to earn an income, and if an expansive open world project was the next step, then it would make sense to also fill the earning gap with another side project, a linear game which they could use to try out some new things that they've always wanted to do, such as a grapple system, the posture break combat system, and a linear story with a more direct storytelling feature, opposed to the environmental storytelling approach they've taken with other games. But I'll return to Sekiro and why the DLC might not be necessary for it, but let's talk about Elden Ring for a moment. I do have a concern for Elden Ring, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this, where I think the concept in practice could be one of the greatest things that From Software ever achieve. However, in my later years, I have become extremely weary and wary of open world games and the way they often sacrifice detail, polish and gameplay for a bloated amount of trivial, undetailed and buggy content. When I came across this Souls game, my first introduction was Dark Souls in 2011, and then I went back and played Demon Souls almost immediately. I was really pulled away from open world games. Where I'd grown up with games like Oblivion, Fable to some degree, and other open world games because of the freedom they'd offered, I experienced something new with the Souls game. A really involved world with a more unique combat system, with both the story and the gameplay respecting me as a player. No longer was I playing Skyrim or Oblivion, where I just slapped R1 over and over at an enemy until I died. I was now thrust into a world where I was forced to learn the mechanics of the game and overcome this with practice and skill. Same with the story. I was not being told the basic story of Skyrim, which is thrown right in your face, of an evil dragon that come back to take over the world. Oh. Instead, I was thrown into a mysterious world, enigmatic, a beauty to its emptiness, and the story not readily available on the surface. I began to ask myself, why am I doing all these things I do in the game? And so I began to explore the lore. And digging through the lore and discovering the story and connecting the dots myself made for a more satisfying experience along with meaningful gameplay. I was hooked and changed forever. Looking back at these open world games, and ones that I've tried to play since, like Fallout 4, I just can't get into them anymore because they offer nothing as deep and meaningful as something like a more linear, focused RPG that concentrates on getting gameplay right. So of course I'm concerned for an open world game for From Software. They've never done a game like this before, and I hope they don't make the same mistakes as other open world game developers, where they sacrifice detail and polish for bloated amounts of content. That being said, I am glad From Software seems to have given the team a good amount of time to develop this game. If we take what Miyazaki said in the interview, then this game has already been in development for over 2 years, and by release it will have been at least 3 years, maybe more depending when we get the release next year. This final crunch year will also have the entire staff in the team, with the skilled team who brought the finely crafted combat system of Sekiro being allowed to focus their talents on this new endeavour as well, which is something I'm extremely pleased about since I loved Sekiro. With that being said, I am sure I'm not alone in feeling some level of disappointment in the decision not to pursue any DLC for Sekiro. For me, although the game is not without its faults, Sekiro was a beautiful and captivating game, with an engaging story and amazing action. The combat system being the best that From Software has ever achieved in my opinion. Since I played a Souls game, I haven't felt the level of achievement as I did when I beat Ishin the Sword Saint since I first beat Smo and Ornstein in Dark Souls 1. Genichiro and Ishin are some of the greatest and most fair boss fights I have ever experienced. I would love to have fought some new challenging bosses in a DLC and explore new parts of the story. In my opinion, upon development, From Software did toy with the idea of DLC for this game, because they gave us various story strands in classic From Software style that were put into the game to tantalise us, but not reveal anything about them so that they could later develop them in a possible DLC. I.e., this is very reminiscent of Artorias, Lawrence, Ludwig and Sister Freda, who would all be mentioned and then have their stories explored in DLC, and in this way Tomoe plays a similar role. Yet despite all this, From Software has now decided not to do any DLC, and whilst I did feel a tinge of disappointment when I read this news first, I actually felt satisfied and not too disheartened by this news, and I'm happy for development to move on to something else. Why am I feeling like this? I feel like Sekiro achieved what it needed to, and now I'll move on to my final thoughts on the game and why a DLC might not really add anything to it, and those resources might be better spent on a more challenging game for From Software, that being Elden Ring. With the end of Dark Souls 3 DLC, we came to the end of an era. Dark Souls has finished, and I hope it doesn't actually come back and that From Software continue to develop new things. Miyazaki actually never wanted it to be a trilogy. If he had been in control the whole time, he probably would have left it at Dark Souls 1. With Bloodborne coming in between Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 3, this was the type of project that Miyazaki and some of it From Software wanted to move on to, developing what they'd learned from these RPG games and focusing it into something new. Now, while Bloodborne isn't entirely new, it is moving in a new direction, with the combat being less a defensive game and more offensive based. A number of people noted that Sekiro, upon release, was quote-unquote the game that Bloodborne wanted to be. Sekiro once again moves away from the Dark Souls formula, more like Bloodborne, but again, much more different. It's a new system that moves away from the dodge and slash mechanics to a graceful, posture-breaking, timing game that feels like you're really crossing swords with an opponent. This is of course, as I've said, one of the major achievements of the game. Even critics of the game usually agree that the combat system is one of the most sophisticated of all From Software titles. Sekiro in a lot of ways is very limited as a game. It is an action game though, so I won't criticise its lack of RPG elements because I think that's reductive and unfair if we compare it to Dark Souls, given that it isn't a Souls game. I've always treated it as its own separate entity, which is maybe why I've loved the game so much and not felt as disappointment as others have felt. That being said, the use of a single weapon without varying movesets of different weapons was a very conducive environment to test a new combat system as we see in Sekiro, without having to worry about how it would affect different weapons and new movesets. In a lot of ways this is what Sekiro is, a linear game with limited elements that allowed for them to challenge themselves and test new things which they will hopefully build upon and use in future games, and in this way it achieved massively. We have the grapple system, which added a new verticality that we haven't seen in any other From Software game. Yes, it's a little bit limited in its application, but it makes for great cinematic gameplay, and you really do feel like a ninja, and it is something I hope that From Software build upon because I actually really enjoyed the verticality of movement in this game. There's also the stealth system, which again is limited because there's not like an alarm system or an alert system where the whole fort comes alert to your presence after a while and you'd have benefits for being able to stealth your way through an entire level. That being said, it does work in another way. It acts as an easy mode for the game, something I would postulate when people criticise Sekiro for not having a quote-unquote hard easy mode, which is silly because I think these more naturalised ways of integrating easy modes into a game is more natural and kind of better for the game. On my first playthrough I stealthed my way through a lot of the game, which meant a lot of combat areas I could kill without even having to engage in combat, and I was able to take one life bar off most of mini-bosses. So mini-bosses had one left life bar. That sounds like an easy mode to me, it's just something you have to apply to yourself, and it's something that's integrated into the storytelling naturally so that it doesn't detract from the immersion in the game. And in this way, the stealth system really achieved well, and I think it's something they should look to continue to improve, maybe for another Sekiro game or something like it. I think they definitely got the basics right, just didn't get the environment for it right. That being said, it did allow for more cinematic immersion in the game. There's nothing better than sneaking around and grappling to feel like a ninja, looking down on your unwary prey from up high before jumping onto them and taking them out silently. It feels great, and it does feel like you are a ninja, and I think it worked really well for Sekiro. Yes, it's a little bit basic, but it's a great start, and it worked really well. I think by now regulars on my channel know that I love the story in Sekiro. I really do, I genuinely do, and I've loved growing my channel by exploring the lore of this game, and it's something I'm really grateful for. It's allowed me to reach a bigger audience and build a greater community because the story is so fascinating, and people would come and join me to discuss this great game and its great story. And if you'd like to join the discussion with me personally, please join my Discord. I'll leave the links for that in the description below, or it's also my channel banner. Anyway, carrying on. A lot of people compare it to the lore of Dark Souls and dismiss it as shallow and linear, but I don't think this is true at all. It's just told in a different manner that Dark Souls is, and again, I don't like comparing Sekiro to Dark Souls or Bloodborne. They're different animals, and that's again why maybe I've enjoyed the game a lot more than other Souls veterans. Anyway, the story itself is engaging. There are some great characters, especially Genichiro, Ishin, Owl and Emma. I also find the lore of the past times that we hear through the sake conversations extremely fascinating, imagining Ishin and Owl drinking together in his golden years. There's also the fascinating story of the divine, the mythology around the aquatic Tomoe, Takeru, and the beings of Fountainhead Palace, and also the journey of the dragon, how it came to be here, and what it actually is. I could go on, there's some great story to this game. And given that it's a linear game, this is very impressive and it achieves massively in the story. Objectively, yes, there are some bits in the story where you feel like it's been glossed over or cut and made to fit, but overall, this is the first direct storytelling that From Software have done in this type of action RPG game, and I think it's worked really well, and they should definitely build upon it. Of course, things were cut out from the game. I even discussed some of the cut elements in one of my videos, which I'll leave the link for below. Would I have liked this? Yes. Would it have added some replayability? Absolutely. Would it have made the game better? Yes. The main system I'm referring to, of course, is the Dragon Eye, Dragon Rot system, and the medicine system that was initially going to be implemented in the game. It would have had a more kind of RPG element to it, and it would have made the game a little bit more, made the stakes higher. You would have had more consequences for dying, which I really would have liked. But would have DLC fixed this? No. This was something that was cut from the game that I do, of course, regret, and I wish the game did have it and it would make it a lot better, and I think a lot of people would play it a lot more if this bit was in it, but probably due to resource it was cut, and that's it, and the DLC would not fix this. That definitely would be a complaint of mine, but a DLC would just add more story content and wouldn't change the systems that are in place. So I've deliberately not included some of the common complaints about this game that compare the game's replayability against Dark Souls, i.e. class systems, new different weapons, things like that. This isn't an RPG, so obviously there aren't other classes or weapons. So for me, it's never been fair to compare it against Dark Souls. I've treated it as its own game from a developer that I love, and I love it for that. And with those parameters, i.e. of being a linear, story-driven action RPG that heavily relies upon a complex combat system, it has achieved massively, in my opinion. Has it achieved in RPG elements, replayability, things like that? Maybe not, but it didn't set out to do that, so I don't think that's a fair criticism. I'll mention some of the criticisms that are objective criticisms, even that I recognise, given that I'm quite biased because I absolutely love this game and I've explored it so much, but even I have to admit these objective criticisms that personally don't matter to me because I love the game as it is, but that I can see have turned off other people to the game. So the pickup items in the game are kind of superfluous. They don't really add much to the game. The balloons, the candies could actually be taken out of the game entirely, in my opinion, and wouldn't make much of a great deal. The majority of the pickups are these items, the candies and the balloons. I'm not really sure what the solution would have been to the lack of meaningful pickups. I think it's something that was maybe considered late on, and it was too late given that a lot of focus was given to the combat system and the upgrade for prosthetics, but not actually thinking about what the other items would be. I agree that this part of the game is pointless, and maybe they could have just done away with pickups altogether, except for upgrades. As I said, this is an action game, and I feel From Software hasn't cut the pickup side off from their other games. This is a hangover from Bloodborne and Dark Souls that they really could have done without, and on that, off the back of this complaint, it also kind of makes New Game Plus kind of pointless. Point of New Game Plus in other Dark Souls games was to get more materials, to get so you could upgrade those other weapons, because there's so many weapons to upgrade, and maybe miss a pickup that you missed, or play through that different aspect of the game that you missed the first time to get a pickup, get a boss soul, whatever. In Sekiro, because it's a linear game and there's not really that many unique pickups, and the upgrades are kind of fairly limited, I feel like New Game Plus could have almost been done away with, and it would have been better to have better pacing for the prosthetic upgrades. Which leads me on to the next complaint, which the prosthetic upgrades are very poorly paced. Compared to the rest of the game, they progress extremely slowly, unnecessarily so, to the point where you have to go through almost 4 cycles or something. Average, I'd say. I'm sure some people do it quicker, but it took me about 4 new games to get all the upgrade materials, and by that point it's pointless. You've defeated the game 4 times over, and you're only then getting these super upgrades, so the pacing of the prosthetic upgrades is completely off. I think they should have just done away with New Game Plus, given there's no good pickup system, and just paced it better so you were able to upgrade everything by the very end of the game if you were good at hunting all those materials down. The grappling is a fun aspect of the game that I think really adds the immersion, and it's good in some of the combat situations where it works. Demon of Hatred and against Mr. Oniwa, it's really cool in those fights. But aside from that, it is pretty basic, and I understand these complaints. I don't think it's necessarily negative, but it wasn't maybe used as well as it could have been. With all those complaints being said, like I say, it doesn't really matter to me because I love the game, and the main gameplay cycle of the game is the combat, and it's something that really held me and gripped me even through all those New Game Pluses, so none of that really mattered too much to me. I loved fighting the Guardian Ape again for the 5th time. I loved challenging myself against Ishin again with the Bell Demon debuff on, stuff like that. I loved the combat cycle, so these things don't matter to me, but I had to recognise them in this video to be as objective as I could be. However, with all those complaints said, I think Sekiro achieves what it needed to, and even absent a DLC, it's a great standalone game in an era where we don't get many finished games. Like I said, yes, it is limited in some ways and stuff was cut, but it is a full complete game. It's not a complete mess that's been designed to rip money out of you through future DLC, microtransactions, things like that. It is a complete game, complete adventure, complete story with some great features. And I got a lot of hours of gameplay of it, great value for money as far as I'm concerned. And DLC would have just been extra material, which I of course would have loved to, but actually on balance, Sekiro doesn't need any more DLC to be a great game, and I'd rather the resource at this point actually goes towards Elden Ring, because I am concerned about the resource that game will take. Sekiro was a nice tentative step towards new things. It was a controlled, linear environment for experimentation that also managed to deliver a great gameplay and an amazing storyline as far as I'm concerned. And I hope From Software don't just forget Sekiro and the lessons learned from it. They made some great discoveries by experimenting and taking a risk with this game, and I really hope they move it forward into their new games and they bring that combat polish and some of the new, more experimental features into the new game. So that's my hot take on the state of Sekiro, Elden Ring, and the DLC situation. Thanks guys for joining me. As I mentioned before, if you want to discuss any of this with me, discuss lore with me, please join my Discord, link will be below, and please subscribe to my channel if you love lore videos. That is more or less what my channel's about. If you're just coming across this video, I'm actually a lore guy. This is just my hot piece on what's happening with the DLC. If you'd like to support the channel, please become a patron, a Demon of Lore. I'd like to say thanks to my current Demons of Lore. I'd like to say thanks to my friend the Embrace One for providing some of the footage that I'm again using in this, and also talking about this subject with me in the past. And thanks everyone for watching this. I hope you have a lovely day. See you next time.